Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be checking out Task Force VII Issue 2 by John Layman, Max Raynor and Luis Guerrero. The Amazo depth charge takes to the Seven Seas this issue, as in the wake of Waller's initial attack, the Doom Patrol find themselves without their powers, and witnessed Aquaman being taken by the Amazo. The team, however, don't seem all too sad that they're missing their powers, specifically Negative Man, who finds out he has been returned to his solid human form, something which gives him a great pause, and something which I hope is actually explored a little bit deeper in the coming issues, since it's not really touched on much this issue, but from the way it's drawn and the way it's kind of presented, it's kind of hinted at that, oh, maybe he kind of likes being human again and, you know, is free from his curse. The team soon meet with Tempest, who was with Arthur when he was taken into the water by the Amazo, meaning that if the villain took his powers, Arthur won't be able to breathe underwater, making this a race against time to save the hero. Down in Atlantis though, things aren't any better, as Depth Charge, using Elastigirl's powers to grow to the size of a kaiju, threatens the underwater kingdom by taking over Arthur's rule of it to ensure it stays in line with the Bureau of Sovereignty. Luckily, Jackson Hyde, the Aquaman, stands in its way and is almost comedically taken out really quickly, like within the same page his powers are taken. And of course, like the Amazos have been doing this since the beginning of the Absolute Power event, where they just take the hero's powers almost straight away, but I would have at least thought they would have given Jackson a little bit of a fight to begin with here. Do not just take him out of the picture straight away and then have him not actually appear anywhere else in the issue. He kind of just disappears a little bit and doesn't even come with Arthur or anyone else at the end of the issue. It's really weird what they're doing with Jackson here, since you would think he would actually be a big part of this as well, since he is also an Aquaman. Luckily, the Doom Patrol, in their new submarine that they were testing out when the Amazos attacked, arrived to help out, and we get a really awesome battle where, thanks to Amazo having all of the team's powers, they end up fighting the Amazo by just kind of knowing these powers better than the robot, since they've had to live with these powers longer than the Amazo has. So we get a really cool sequence where Beast Girl knows that because the robot has taken her telepathy, an ability to talk with animals, she can tell that the robot is having great trouble mind controlling the great white sharks that it has, since the sharks are fighting back thanks to their millions of years of evolution and animal instinct winning over this mind control that this robot just barely has a grasp on. And you couple that with the fact that the Amazo is also using the telepathy on the Atlanteans to try and convince them to join him and sort of, manipulate their thought process. It's kind of stretching him in too many different ways. And I like that also kind of feeds into who this Depth Charge is as a character, because over the course of the issue we learned that they are, much like every other Amazo we've seen so far, have quirks or like little character traits, and this one is very much like a unruly child king. They're very prone to violence, and like, not when they don't get their way, they get very mad. Case in point, when Arthur tells his people to stand down in order to protect them, Depth Charge gets really angry that someone dare give orders to people he sees as his people, and ends up throwing Arthur away, which leads to the little tank that he's trapped in becoming filled with water, and it's kind of a race against time to get him out of there before he drowns. I like that all these Amazos have these kind of character quirks and these little things that make them different from each other, and they're not just, a robot version of Superman or a robot version of Batman. They actually have their own personalities with some of those characteristics from those heroes that they've taken powers from. It's kind of muddled in there a little bit, and it's caused some sort of problem within their programming. After Arthur is thrown away and his cube becomes filled with water, it's a rush to save him, and Arthur refuses to leave his people behind, but without his powers, he's pretty much useless, and Tempest forces him to go with Robot Man and the others while he tries to deal with Depth Charge, who, thanks to Arthur trying to calm his people down, has kind of flown into a rage and has started to destroy Atlantis. And we learn that this actually isn't part of the plan, as Waller eventually gets in contact with him and tries to determine whether he's actually subdued Atlantis and made them fall in line, and he reveals that he kinda has, but also he's taken Atlantis off the board, utterly destroying the nation and its people, something he wasn't meant to do. And Waller isn't really too happy about it, but at the same time doesn't really care, since it means it's one less thing for her to worry about. And this makes me think there's maybe some sort of failsafe programming sort of seeping through here, where he's meant to be taking down all of these bigger threats to what I guess, you know, in Failsafe's original programming, he was meant to take down all these threats to Batman and to like his end game of justice. And I could see in some warped way him thinking that taking down Atlantis is just like taking another threat off the board that he has to deal with later on. So I could see some sort of programming coming through here. And there's been hints as well that maybe Failsafe is playing some sort of game against Waller, and maybe the Amazos will all turn on her eventually, especially because it's been shown that she has very little control over the Amazos and they barely follow her orders. And just so happens that her orders kind of fall in line very vaguely with what their programming is. So there's kind of a little bit of overlap, which is why they still fall in line. But definitely see at some point them all turning on Waller, and maybe she has to turn to the heroes for help. Thanks to Depth Charge kind of going off the deep end, no pun intended, and destroying much of Atlantis, Aquaman and the others are allowed to escape, and they head to the Fortress of Solitude to meet up with the other Resistance members, something which we saw in the pages of Superman issue 16 recently. Aquaman and the Doom Patrol aren't the only ones who get a little bit of a story, as Steve Trevor's story continues as well, and we find Sarge Steele gleefully leading the man into his sub-basement dingy office. I love that Steve doesn't take any of this man's shit either. He knows exactly what he's trying to do. Steele is trying to stonewall Steve's attempts to get into Waller's organization via the military, even figures out that Steele wants to set him up to make it look like Trevor is working as a double agent for Wonder Woman, feeding the hero information from within. Steele, however, finishes with his games and decides he's just going to knock Steve out and throw him in the Gamorrean prison that they are at. There isn't really much to do in this story. It's just kind of set up for, I guess, what's going to happen with Steve a little later on down the line. But I appreciate the constant inclusion of Steve and Steele's story as kind of backups for this tie-in. It's two really fantastic characters who've really grown in the Tom King Wonder Woman book, and characters that I really like, and they've been set up as rivals, which is really interesting. And I'm sure it's going to lead to some sort of exploration of Waller's inner operation through the story as well. The second issue of Task Force VII's tie-in series was a lot better than the first. It felt more structured, it set up a threat and mission for our heroes, and explored the new Amazos a lot better than it did with Last Son in the previous issue, fleshing out Depth Charge's character a little more while leaving room to explore some more later on in the coming issues. Hopefully they can keep up this momentum with the coming issues. There's still a couple left. I think there's 7 or 8 in total. So next issue is Jadestone battling Alan Scott. I'm very much looking forward to that, as we got a hint of it in last week's Green Lantern issue, and it seemed like a lot of fun. I'm going to give this issue an 8.5 out of 10.